Looking at this camera right here. All right. Hello, everybody in cyberspace land. Everybody that's catching this live. My name is Karanja Cruz. I'm the founder of the Teaching with Purpose organization and practice. I'm a teacher by trade, but currently operating as the role of a teacher activist and teacherpreneur, and most importantly, a parent. A parent that has two beautiful children in the Portland Public School District. So we're going to come through that lens, through a parental lens, through a community lens. So let me tell you why we're actually here. We're here because we're in a very pivotal, vital time politically. I feel that we're in a very vital time of transition for our community on multiple levels. But for this particular level, I think we have a huge transition in our educational arena. I think this is the time for us, especially during the time of Trump era, for all of us to be politically conscious. I'm going to say that one more time. I think this is the time for all of us, and when I say all of us, I'm including the most disenfranchised communities that don't normally have that political consciousness. So I feel like it's my role as a community member is to enlighten the community about certain things that's happening on the political level. As an educator, my political lane is education. Excuse me. So our goal with Teaching with Purpose is to inform and to empower the communities on how political structures work and how we can advocate for equitable change. So we want everybody to understand that our educational political structure is it kind of looks like this pretty much on a local educational level. We have our school board that we elect in. And our school board directs the superintendent. I repeat, the school board directs the superintendent. And the superintendent directs the whole district along with his staff. So the role of a board is to, number one, to create and evaluate policy and to show and implement, not implement, but to actually show that policy to the superintendent for them to actually implement the various policies that we have in place. So I just want to say the school board is a very important position, but it's also a volunteer position. So these are people who are volunteering their own time and resource. Time is resource. So we, first of all, those of you who are in cyberland, you should always appreciate your school board members because this is free. They're doing this for free. They didn't have to do this. They didn't have to run the campaigns and everything that they invested their time. So that tells you a lot about their mindset and their heart that they actually want to do something for our community. So we should always be aware of that. I want to draw something real fast that's on the PPS website. It kind of gives you information on what the purpose of the school board is. And I would encourage you guys to take some time to take a look at that. And if you look at here at the bullet points, it says to accomplish this role, the board determines a long range and direction for the district. But most importantly, it says right here, it says communicates with the community. And that is what this platform is. So we're planning to do these discussions bi-monthly to have a platform where our board members can communicate to the community about what's happening. So again, I want to appreciate the school board members. They're going to introduce themselves shortly here for taking the time out of a Saturday, volunteering their time to come and to inform the community about the happenings of PPS. So back to the role of policy to practice. It's very important that we connect policy to practice. So we have a variety of different policies on multiple levels. We have policy on a school board level. We have actual public law that is public policy. But the key is to connect this policy and actually bring it into practice. And that is the point and the purpose of this discussion here for this particular forum. So before also we get started, I want to announce that we currently now have a new superintendent. I'm excited in terms of listening to the intro. I'm just going to take some time out for you, the community, to kind of see what the purpose and I would say what the job description and what type of superintendent our particular school board was looking for, And I think our chair, co-chair, kind of articulates this pretty well. So I'm going to take some time to play this, and then we're going to transition to talk about the new superintendent and begin to delve into the policy so we can have policy to practice. So take this time to look at what the focus was for the recruitment of this particular superintendent, and then from there we're going to dive into our discussion.
Leader, the school board came together quickly, and I really want to thank my fellow board members. This has been a very a summer that was not free of meetings. It was we spent a lot of time on this process, but we've narrowed it down to a single candidate. And we really had an opportunity, I think, to combine the strengths and expertise of all the board members, and also just the voice of the community was infused within this process. So I'm excited this morning to be presenting Guadalupe Guerrero as the candidate to be our next superintendent. He's a proven educator who brings a deep understanding of classroom teaching and is connected to what students need and children need to succeed. Our goal was to hire an educational leader who is student-focused and is experienced building and sustaining systems to support every student leaving our schools ready for college, career, and life.
So notice the focus. She said instructional leader with a student focus. That's very important.
And he is that leader. And with that, I'm going to ask for a deeper discussion or presentation by both Director Moore and Director Constam. Director Moore, will you provide the overview of the position description, and Director Constam, why the board felt that Guadalupe Guerrero was the right candidate and the best match of the candidates that we met with.
The position description is on the website, so if you're interested in the gory details, you can find it there. I'm going to give kind of an overview, and I think the best summary is in the opening narrative of the position description. We are looking for a transformational leader who can harness the community support and work collaboratively with all stakeholders, students, parents, educators, staff in our communities, to develop a shared vision for the district and create a robust organization capable of implementing it. The ideal candidate will manage PPS as an effective, student-focused organization with a professional culture that embraces transparency, equity, continuous quality improvement, and a commitment to excellence. And we specified some desired characteristics in a few categories. First, an effective systems thinking manager who can work collaboratively with stakeholders to establish a shared vision and an actionable strategic plan for a student-centered school district, who can align fiscal resources, who can build robust and effective management structures capable of implementing large-scale initiatives with fidelity and accountability, establishes district-wide expectations for programs and services to ensure equity and equitable access to educational opportunities for all students, who can oversee the modernization program. Second, a capable communicator and team builder who has demonstrated skills in exercising collaborative leadership to build both a strong district organization and partnerships with stakeholders in pursuit of a shared student-centered vision, who can build a strong district management team, productive relationship with the board, who communicates thoroughly, effectively, and regularly with both the board and the community and all of our stakeholders, fosters a positive professional climate of trust and respect, who has a demonstrated track record of working in diverse urban and or suburban environments. And the third major category, a knowledgeable and experienced instructional leader who...
I'm going to pause on that again. First of all, I want to appreciate you guys for that description and holding to the description. Again, we hear that language of instructional leader. That's very important, especially in terms of the political climate that our educational system is in, that has been the lack of focus for a number of years. And to bring that back to the forefront, I'm very excited about that. I'm going to fast forward to board member Amy, as she's explained to the community a little bit about our new superintendent's story and his journey to education. I believe he's hit pretty much, became a teacher, principal. He was a central administrator and then became a superintendent. So he's grown into the ranks of experience in terms of our educational system. So that was refreshing to hear as well. So I'm going to fast forward to that portion, and then we're going to introduce our student moderators, because again, if you heard the language, it says now our district is going to be a student-centered focus district, and we want to be able to even model that even in this discussion here. So I'm going to fast forward to that portion of the description of our new superintendent and kind of move forward from there.
And is fully committed to.
I would be delighted to. So first, addressing Guadalupe Guerrero's experience, going back to when he was a student. He's a English language learner when he entered school in the Bay Area in California, and it was really through his experiences as a student that he started to see education as the pathway for all the opportunity that he hoped to find. And so he excelled as a student, bilingual, was involved in, he's an accomplished musician, an accomplished athlete, so really became connected to his own path to his future through his experience in school, went on to become a paraeducator, then an excellent teacher, a principal, an administrator. So these are all experiences that are incredibly important to being able to lead effectively in this role. As a teacher, he was recognized as an instructional leader. This is what led him to his pathway as an administrator, where he was able to really take what he had learned in terms of what is effective teaching in the classroom and try to bring it to a broader systems level and learn with other teachers engaged in the same process and help everyone learn from one another in that process. So in his role in San Francisco, he ended up overseeing a group of struggling schools in the district and really leading a comprehensive strategy to to propel those schools to greater success, using student data, using incredible collaboration among the teachers in those schools to really invest in best practices. And the heart of it really was learning together, these opportunities for teachers to take the time to work with one another about what was going on in their classrooms, what they were seeing as pivotal in terms of leading to student success. So this was some of the data that we reviewed as a board that Julia referred to in our selection process. We really spent a lot of time with data on this set of schools that he oversaw. He was the architect of the professional development for that initiative, working with the teachers and administrators. We also had the opportunity to talk with some of the principals in those schools, and one of the conversations I had with a principal of one of those schools was interesting in that he said that as a teacher and an administrator, during that time he felt like he was on a parallel path with his students, that his learning and growth as an educator was just as phenomenal as the gains that he saw his students make. And I thought that was really an interesting comment. Really a strong instructional leader, and then a systems thinker. As Rita mentioned, that was an important part of our position description and what we were.
So again, strong instructional leader. I'm gonna drive that to the nail for this for the start of this discussion, because it's extremely important. First of all, again, I want to acknowledge the board. As you can hear through these testimonies, they spent a lot of time. The fact that you guys took the time to interview principals and actually go to his hometown and to take that extensive time and research to find out who this guy really is. again, I applaud you guys and I appreciate you guys. And again, I understand this is your own time. You're volunteering your time to do this, so it's appreciated. We're gonna do one more video of our new superintendent, his introduction, and I'm going to highlight on one of the things that he states, and then we're going to move on from there.
That Guadalupe Guerrero will be our next leader in Portland schools. And with that, I'd like to introduce our next leader, Guadalupe Guerrero.
Good morning, everybody. I'm incredibly humbled. I'm deeply honored to be named superintendent of the Portland Public Schools. I think it's an incredible opportunity to lend leadership and work with the talented educators, leaders, support staff, broader community in partnership towards making the Portland Public Schools the premier school system in America. I see the superintendency as the key instructional leader of the school system. I'm going to repeat that. I see the superintendency as the key instructional leader in the school system. I believe it's...
I'm going to pause right there. Again, that was so refreshing to hear. I haven't heard a superintendent state that in a very long time. In my experience as a teacher in the Portland Public School District and other districts, I felt that we lacked instructional leaders. And I hope that this fervency and this expectation and this intention of being an instructional leader will fall and trickle down to the principals. It will, first of all, trickle down to site directors, school directors, that will trickle down to principals, that will eventually trickle down to classrooms, and then trickle down to students. And we actually see effective practice, and we can actually see gains and growth. That's the key. That's the heart of education, and we're hoping to see that. And we, as community members, will definitely support you guys in directing the superintendent and holding him accountable to really deliver what he's stating to deliver. So with that said, I'm going to move on to what Teaching with Purpose is. Our organization and our mission is to engage and inspire and educate teachers, administrators, parents, students, and community members about the importance of culturally relevant pedagogy and practice. Our goal is to research, examine, and evaluate equity-focused policy that can be translated into practice, support and inspire educational leadership committed to the work of culturally relevant practice, and develop a network of educators committed to developing culturally relevant course of studies, instructional practices that will impact their students and the greater community. What the most important thing is our Teaching with Purpose is centered around the research and the great scholars of Dr. Gloria Lasson-Billings, Dr. Geneva Gay, and practitioner Augusta Mann. The research suggests that culturally relevant pedagogy empowers students. I'm going to repeat that. Culturally relevant pedagogy and practice empowers students, parents, and families to access power politically, socially, economically, to consider critical perspectives on policies and practices that they may have direct impact on students' lives and their communities. By way of definition, it contends, Dr. Gloria Lasson-Billings contends that culturally relevant teachers engage in the world and others critically. In order to do this, students must develop a broader social, political consciousness that allows them to critique cultural norms, values, and institutions to produce more and maintain social inequities. Now, not to maintain inequities, but to change the inequities. To model that, we have two student moderators that will moderate this discussion of the racial equity policy that PPS has. So I want to introduce to you guys two students in the Portland Public School District. One who actually is a student representative on the board. His name is Moses, if you can come up, please. And then we also have Deasia, who will be a high school senior next year. So give it up for them. Those of you who are in the audience, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start with each of you telling us and the audience your name, background, and why you chose to serve as a school board member, and one thing you are passionate about changing when you complete your term.
There we go. Hi, is this working? We're good? Okay. I'm Scott Bailey. I need to start with some disclaimers. We're here as individual board members, so nothing we say is representative of what the board as a whole believes. And secondly, when we agreed to come on the show 2 months ago, since that time, the board has created working committees, and we are actually one entire committee here. Which means legally around public meetings, we can't talk about anything that is our committee's business because we haven't done a public notice around that meeting. Paul and I are actually 2/3 we constitute a quorum of another committee, the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, so we also can't talk about that. So there might be some items where we would say, yeah, we're gonna leave that be, but a lot of other things, and I think most of what's on our agenda we'll be able to respond to. So sorry, I have to put that out there. We take our public meetings laws very seriously. So why am I here? How did I get on the board? A couple of things. I've lived in Portland all my life. I've been involved in social activism for most of my adult life. My kids loved it when they could go to school and show and tell day, say, yeah, my dad spent 3 days in jail for protesting, kind of a thing. And so when my kids became students in Portland Public Schools, it was pretty natural for me to get involved. I got named on a committee, and it was all downhill from there. I got very involved in things, and so I've been doing that for since the mid-1990s, roughly 20 years now. And it's, for me, it's a belief around social justice and around recognizing my privilege as a white male, cis. I mean, you can sort of check just about every privilege I grew up with and have, and so it's my responsibility to work to change inequities, to work for a more equitable society. So that's how I ended up here, and just working on issues over the years. Getting tired of beating my head against the wall, and wanting to have more responsibility and be able to do good things for kids. I mean, that's the other bottom line, is doing good things for kids. Does that answer the question? Anything I left out?
No, that was it.
Oh,
I think
good.
that answers the question.
Okay, good.
I'm Paul Anthony. I've been on the board for 2 years. I represent close in northeast and northeast and southeast Portland, a narrow little band that follows the east bank of the Willamette. I got involved in Portland Public Schools because I have 3 children in the public schools. And about 15 years ago, my family moved in next door to Jefferson High School. I became very involved in the neighborhood, and it was immediately clear to us that Jefferson was being horribly abused by the district, and that was having a very bad impact on the community. I wanted to try and fix that. And then as time went on, there were issues at my children's schools. There was the attempt to rebalance the schools that fed to Jefferson, and that did not go well. And was threatening to close more schools in our part of Portland, and I wanted to try and fix that. And then my oldest daughter decided she wanted to go to Benson High School, and I started to see problems at Benson and the way that Benson was treated, and I wanted to try and make those better. Over and over again, what's been clear for Jefferson, Benson, and the schools that feed to it from North and Northeast Portland is that access to opportunity is not offered equitably at all. And from the most basic, what I will say is from the most basic level of flush toilets, all the way to what courses are offered, what opportunities for high schools are offered, what kind of job opportunities are offered. It isn't even equal, let alone equitable. It's grossly unequal. And I want to fix that. So that's why I got involved.
Thank you, Paul.
And my name is Rita More. I am 2 months into being on the school board. And my story is pretty similar. I moved to Portland in 1989. Frankly, I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to public schools until I had my own kid. My son entered Portland Public Schools in 2002, and my career started with sort of doing the mom thing, PTA, site council, and we came actually in 2002, if you remember, the 2002-2003 school year was when the bottom fell out of the state budget. And my first PTA meeting, the other parents there were talking about, we were coming from abroad, so I was like, we were hot off the plane. And first meeting, other parents are talking about how are we going to set up guerrilla schools in March when we have to shutter the doors because there's no money. And my reaction was, excuse me, what? So then I started to really pay attention, and I got kind of up close and personal with PPS and the way it works in 2005, 2006. I was president of a site council that was, and we were brought into one of the facilitated conversations around the reconfiguration to K-8 schools. And it was, we were talking about closing a school, and it was an eye-opening experience. It was a window into how PPS makes decisions and involves communities in decision-making, and how they set priorities, and what I saw was deeply troubling to me. So since then, I've been pretty actively involved in working around mostly systemic issues within PPS. And the upshot is, for as long as I've been paying attention, there have been tremendous inequities in educational opportunities. I mean, this is a common theme among the three of us. And a lot of them are rooted in the way decisions are made and the evidence that's being used or not used to make decisions, and what's being identified as the real priorities, and how we're using our money, and how are we serving students. So I've been on a lot of PPS committees. I've done a lot of work on enrollment and transfer issues, and also budget issues. So I've been on the budget committee for the last 6 years. so I have gotten sort of increasingly involved with PPS, and during that time, I have seen some improvements, but there has continued to be some real issues in kind of basic functioning that is harming students. So I decided to run for the board because I think education, from my own personal experience, you know, I grew up a poor working class kid in Boston, and I got a great education in public schools, and it opened up the world to me. And I want all kids to have the kinds of opportunities I had. And I decided that the only way I could really make the kind of difference that I think I needed to make and could make was to be on the board. So here I am.
Thank you, Rita. So our next question for the board is, how does the PPS board plan on enforcing the racial education policy? Do you want to start, Scott?
I'll start, and feel free to pitch in, and for you guys to make this a discussion.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start off with big picture. So I've been involved with PPS for 20 years now. We don't have an educational vision. We don't have a strategic plan. And those are fundamental for any large organization. They're just fundamental building blocks that you need. So by the time you get down to a racial equity plan, if you don't have those things in place and being executed, it's a racial equity plan is not going to be put into place as well. So there's some big picture things that I think all three of us have advocated around that. What's exciting about our incoming superintendent is that he worked on that in San Francisco, putting that together, engaging with the community, putting together a strategic plan, and putting it into action. So that's one of the skill sets we were looking for. Our racial equity plan that just sunsetted, it was a 5-year plan. Mm-hmm. If you read it, it's not a plan at all. It didn't have specific action steps, timeline, measurables. How are we going to know we're successful? So one of the things we will be working with the new superintendent with and staff is, okay, we've got this value statement and policy. We want to see the plan, and that's why you hire a professional educator, is to put that plan together with all the pieces of what's what are the resources needed to ensure that this plan gets enacted. What do we want it to look like when it's enacted? So that's kind of a big picture overview, and I'll start there and then hand it off, or you can ask for elaboration.
I agree with Scott. We have an excellent policy, and it is, I think it really is a point of pride for PPS that we even have the policy. It's a national model. We were one of the first districts in the country to even have such a thing. Mm-hmm. But it is a common theme within PPS that we have a lot of great ideas, we have a lot of great policies. The problem is the implementation. And implementation involves, kind of behind the scenes, sometimes boring, detail work where you figure out, what are the resources we have. And resources are money, probably first and foremost, but not only. I mean, resources cover everything. Like, who are the people we have? Who are the, what are the processes and the systems and what's the plan? What's the plan? And one of the things that over the next however long we talk, you'll hear from the three of us is PPS has not had plans really for anything. And the upshot of that is that schools have been left to fend for themselves to a very large degree. And it's been dependent on having a principal who knows how to work the system and who has, a vision for what the school can do and should do, and a school community that can share in that vision and then can, somehow muster the resources to make it happen. And that has led to tremendous disparities from one school to the next across the district. And, interim Superintendent McCain, pretty early on in his one-year tenure, came up with, I think, a very apt description of PPS. We're a district of schools, we're not a school district. Which is a long way of saying, in order to make real the commitments we have made in this racial educational equity policy, we first have to do a whole bunch of really fundamental building of processes and infrastructure and understandings and shared vision about what it means. What does racial educational equity actually look like from the perspective of a student? And we haven't done that yet. And it's not a satisfying answer. I get that. And our collective heads have been exploding about this and many other things for a long time. But the good news is, with this new superintendent, he knows what he's walking into. He knows exactly what he's walking into. And he has identified this to us as one of his first priorities. He has talked about, you guys need a strategic plan, and he can do that. So as critical as I am and have been of PPS, we have tremendous potential here because everybody is, I think, truly committed to the concept of racial educational equity. We haven't figured out yet how to deliver it. And that's what we're going to do now.
So just a clarifying question. There was a lot of discussion about, lots of planning and lots of hard work that needs to go into this. And it's been long known that there's kind of a plan or a thought of a plan without any action. And so who's going to hold who accountable to make sure that this priority is thought through and, pursued to be accomplished in this district? Because we've been working on it for 5 years, and so.
Okay, well, I would say yes and no. We've been working on it.
Yeah.
There are some things we have been working on. There are other things that have not been worked on.
Yeah, there's like a 5-year plan, and so when we develop our new 5-year plan or however it looks like, who's going to be held accountable to making sure that's completed? Because if we have a 5-year plan, then the 5-year plan, someone should have been accountable for making sure that was accomplished.
And ultimately, the board holds the superintendent accountable. So ultimately, this is on us. I don't expect that anybody's going to be hesitant to criticize us as time goes on. But your job is to hold us accountable. Our job is to hold the superintendent accountable. And then one of the things that we're holding the superintendent accountable on is coming up with the plans, coming up with the vision, coming up with a strategic plan that we can all buy into and we all agree to and we all commit to. And then his job is going to be making sure that everybody knows, what piece of that strategic plan they own, and what they're supposed to do about it, and how they're going to be held responsible. So,
Thank you.
And following up on some of those comments, with which I completely agree, but fundamentally one of the problems with representative democracy is that people end up getting the kind of government they deserve. And so, yes, ultimately it's the voters who have to hold the board accountable for making these changes, correcting the inequities in the system. Now, yes, like Rita said, this is going to take time, and it's going to take a great deal of very boring, very tedious effort. But one of the very good things about the incoming superintendent is that emphatically, while he is a realist in terms of time, he is over and over again not an incrementalist. He is not going to be satisfied with the slow scratch of progressive change. He is going to expect, he's going to demand very fast results, and I believe he's going to hold himself accountable for that first and foremost. Not at all to say that that's not the responsibility of the board. The other thing that goes along with this work of setting real priorities and holding the district accountable to those, is that that's going to require money and a reassessment of our priorities. The budget process, I've said many times, has really been broken in this district for a very long time. And I could be exceptionally boring about all of the ways that that has happened. But the point is that we are now radically revising our whole budget process. We've got some very talented staff who've been working on that this whole last year. Members of the board have been very involved with that this whole last year. And we are going to see in this coming year and coming budget process a radically different assessment and prioritization of where the district is spending its resources. And to loop that back, every day that we don't do that, every day that we let these inequities persist, we are harming children. We are limiting the future opportunities, the future lives of our children. And we have to correct that. And the three of us and the board and the superintendent all viscerally feel the importance of that.
One of the things that was very compelling about our new superintendent that we heard over and over again talking with people that he'd worked with or partnered with in his current job is that for people who reported to him, he was very clear with them about what their job was, what their deliverable was, how their effectiveness would be evaluated, and two, very good at both assembling a team, hiring new people, and coaching, working with current staff to help them be effective with that deliverable. So that's just one more thing. We heard that very consistently. That gives us some optimism.
Can I just throw in one other thing? So I sort of feel like at this point in the proceedings, somebody has to acknowledge that, we've been very critical. Mm-hmm. I mean, anybody's been paying attention, we've been very critical. And we're kind of continuing to be critical today. But I have, I've met a lot of people, a lot of employees in PPS for a long time. And I think I can truthfully say that I have never met anybody who isn't doing this for the right reasons. They want to make, they want to help kids. They want to do right by kids. They want PPS to deliver the best possible education so that kids can thrive. The difficulty has been that they have been working within a system that has been and not organized in a way that allows them to do that most effectively and efficiently. So it's been a source of, I think, tremendous frustration for everyone. Teachers and principals and central office staff, not just students and parents. This is a system that has not been functioning well for a long time. And one of the things that we heard over and over and over again from the new superintendent, and the press conference yesterday, if we went just a little bit further than the clip that you saw, what he said was that it is the job of the superintendent to make sure that schools and teachers and classrooms have the resources they need to do right by kids. And that's going to require some change, some system changes. But that's the focus. So I don't want anybody to walk away from this thinking that, we're calling out individuals within the district as the bad guys in this story. They're not. But they need to be working in a system that works.
And if I could just add to that, fundamentally, education in Oregon, and certainly Portland Public Schools, have been grossly underfunded, and not just set at a level that's underfunded, but there's been a progressive series of disinvestments in education in Oregon now for 30 years. And people have been working in that system, and the system has been crippled by that. People have been hideously frustrated in their careers. And the whole structure of Portland Public Schools has come to reflect poverty thinking. And one of the things I'm very confident we're going to see from our incoming superintendent is a much healthier posture towards the state and a much better calling out of the funding inequities that are rolling out of Salem. And I really look forward to that.
All right. The racial equity policy states Portland Public Schools will significantly change its practices in order to achieve and maintain racial equity in education. Educational equity means raising the achievement of all students while narrowing the gaps between the lowest and highest performing students. What gaps does the racial policy refer to? Is it the role of the school board to know these gaps, and how can we collectively work together to help close the gaps?
Well, I think probably the most obvious gaps that the policy is addressing are things like achievement test scores, disparities in exclusionary discipline in particular. Let me put it this way. I think the way we have been talking about racial educational equity has tended to focus on those two things. So those are, and graduation rate. Sorry, yeah, graduation rate. So those are the quantitative measures that we've been using. Those are the things we can attach numbers to. And those are not, I mean, those are important. And we have, PPS has over the years taken some actions that have actually positively addressed some of those issues. And we can quibble about whether, what we think about those actions and whether they were the most effective that we could do. But there has been progress. There has been progress on graduation rate, on addressing disparities in discipline, and test scores. What's more difficult to measure are kind of the qualitative things that can often be actually more important for students, but it's hard to attach numbers to. So it's things like access to culturally relevant curriculum. We've got a new law, we've got a new policy. I don't know that we've actually figured out what that is going to look like yet. We've made efforts to increase the number of teachers of color. I don't think the results are as good as we would like them to be. We've had some success in increasing the number of teachers of color. We haven't really made great progress in retention. So what tends to happen is we can hire new teachers, but are they still there 5 years later? And we need work on that. And a lot of that has to do with sort of the qualitative stuff, the climate in the school, the degree, the kind of relationships teachers have among themselves, and whether teachers feel supported, and whether they're getting the right kind of professional development. So it's a complicated thing, and I would argue that we need to be looking at the qualitative measures, but we also need to be kind of broadening our view and trying to come up with measures that address the qualitative issues as well. And that's going to take some doing. That requires a real conversation.
There are some other things I'd point out. We know that one of the places where we most persistently lose students, where most often students are tuning out, is in middle school. And for many years, we had really underfunded, under-resourced our middle school programs. We have, in the last couple of years, started to introduce more opportunities there that are really having a big impact. One is creating more awareness of future career opportunities and trying to connect students with chances to see what business or industry they might want to go into. Giving them more opportunities for hands-on education. And one thing in particular, we have gone from essentially no opportunities for middle school athletics to now thousands of students participating. And that's been done in a very, very short span of time. All of those are having a real impact and are going to start paying off in terms of graduation rates within a couple of years.
One thing I want to add, while we have a specific racial equity policy, a lot of times when I think about equity, and I'll just speak for myself, I'm also thinking about lines that aren't specifically around race, like English language learners and students receiving special education services as well. So my personal lens has a slightly broader range in terms of equity. I'm going to go back to our new superintendent. One of the things we did in the hiring process was to ask candidates to bring data from their district around third grade reading scores, discipline, and graduation rates, talk about the data, identify specifically what they had done in their district to influence outcomes, and to speculate on how what they might bring from that to Portland. And Guadalupe just nailed it. And he had different ways of looking at data that were beyond anything I'd seen, and we were just like, wow, okay, this guy gets it.
So the question also refers and says, how can we collectively work together to help close the gaps? So I just want to know, there's been a lot of talk about at the top how this equity is going to be implemented and how all these plans are going to get to put to work, but how does the district or the central office plan on incorporating everyone from the students? Because inequities are just happening more than just a high school student for me, but through elementary, pre-K, and middle school. So how are we going to implement those student voices pre-K through 12 in order to collectively work together to close these gaps in equity?
Okay, the real answer, I'm not entirely sure. We've got a new superintendent coming in, so some of this is going to be, some of this is going to be determined by how he wants to approach stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm reasonably confident at this point that one of the first things we're going to be doing is coming up with a way to develop a real educational vision for this district, and then out of that vision have a strategic plan. That's been identified by both the board and the new superintendent as like one of the first orders of business. And I think part of that discussion is going to have to be, collectively, what do we all think these gaps are? And what's driving these gaps? And what can we do to, at the very least, mitigate the gaps, if not eliminate them? And what kinds of strategies can we use to improve outcomes for kids of color, poor kids, kids in special ed, kids who are English language learners? I mean, how can we make this district work for all kids, regardless of which school they happen to attend? And I think part of that is we're going to need to involve the entire community in this. Because, yeah, you're right. I mean, if this is just a top-down thing, one more top-down thing, it's going to be about as successful as all the other top-down things that have happened, which is to say not very. So, I mean, I'm seeing that I am not by nature an optimistic person. And I can be pretty critical, and have been. And I can truthfully say I am feeling optimistic about PPS. Probably for the first time since I walked into a door or walked into a school, and I really think that we're going to have fairly quickly a much better sense of what the community wants PPS to be doing, and then we're going to be able to figure out how to make it happen.
I certainly agree with that, and I'm at least as critical and as cranky as Rita is, probably much more so. But I'm very optimistic also. There are some very real, very practical initiatives Rita and I are both working on that are still very tentative and that we can't talk about yet in public. But I mention those so that I can say, I want you to know we aren't just being critical, we are working on things that are going to make a significant difference for exactly the issues you're talking about. I also want to mention that, exactly like Scott said, our English language learners are becoming more and more front and center on our measures of equity, and that's pressure that's going to be coming down from the state. Right now, the state of Oregon is looking at how it's going to implement the Every Student Succeeds Act, and under No Child Left Behind, mostly, we were being rated on standardized test scores. Under Every Student Succeeds, the Oregon Department of Education is going to be looking at test scores, but they're going to be de-emphasized. They're going to be looking much more at how we're doing with our English language learners. And also, and this gets to one thing Rita alluded to, they're going to be looking at chronic absenteeism. And that's one area that pulls the whole community in, because our big problem with absenteeism is due to our lack of health care for our children. And that reflects statewide budget priorities. And there I'm really hoping, I'm expecting, that the district and the superintendent are going to have a much louder voice going forward.
And so for our next question, it asks, what ways has the district been measuring this progress, and what efforts and plans has it put forth in order to accomplish this goal?
So I think the measurements have been the three that we've talked about, and the district has had milestones, which included third grade reading based on test scores, which included graduation rates, which included looking at disciplinary processes. And there's one I'm missing that's around the ready for high school transition period, or maybe looking at that freshman year in transition to see that how many credits kids have on track for graduation. I think that's all of them. So there are some measures there, but I think Rita's point is well taken. We need to capture some more subjective measures as well.
Okay, so at the risk of getting really geeky, we have milestones. So take graduation rate. It's a noble goal to increase the graduation rate. But if you don't have if you haven't mapped out what does it take to get a kid from kindergarten through 12th grade, and how you're going to, what are the steps that are going to help a kid get there, then you're not going to know what your graduation rate is until it's 12, 13 years down the road. And I think one of the things that the milestones framework was a step in the right direction, but they're still pretty. I want to. They're kind of snapshots, and they're not linked to a real strategic plan. So if a kid, like the first measure we have, the state is toying with the idea of having a kindergarten readiness measure, but that's very much a work in progress. So like the first snapshot we're going to get for every kid is third grade reading, but if you just look at that number, some kids are on track, they're at grade level reading, and some kids are not. Well, do we know why the kids who are not at grade level are having trouble? What's the issue? And then if we identify an issue, well, then what are we doing about it? But if the next snapshot you get isn't until 9th grade, that's a long time in between those. So one of the things that that I think we need to do better at is, taking these snapshots and then breaking them down into, what's supposed to happen between this one and that one. So in these intervening 6 years, okay, what's happening? And one of the things that was really impressive about Guerrero in his presentation of the data was that he was deep in the weeds. I mean, he knew what he was talking about, but he actually made it interesting. And that, a data presentation that is interesting, that is an art. And he made it interesting because he kept bringing it back to the kids. What does this mean for the kids? And he talked a lot about, the data has to be looked at in terms of a strategic plan. You got to know what you're going to do about the numbers. And that is, that blew me away. So.
Want to peel back that 3rd grade reading score, which is so important. Well, there are some studies showing that 90% of the achievement gap is there before kindergarten. So schools are in, I'm not saying that to let public schools off the hook at all, but schools are in a, dealing with social issues that are outside our control. But it's our job to put resources in the right place to counteract those social forces. But are we, we're probably pretty clear in a lot of our 1st and 2nd grade classrooms who's behind on reading. So what can we do to direct resources to extend our too short school year for some of those kids? To have summer programs, to put more resources in during the school year, all those things. We know from research that schools close the achievement gap during the school year, and then it widens back during summer. What are the ways we can partner with community organizations to lessen that over that summer? So there's a lot of things like there that we need to look at. Two things in particular I want to say. One thing that PPS has done and expanded over the last couple of years is the early kindergarten transition programs at 17 of our schools, something like that. So any child that's registered for kindergarten at those schools, but who hasn't been in a pre-K program, their families are invited to be part of a 3-week program that actually just ended. So it ends there's a little break before school starts, where those kids come in for half a day. There's teachers at the school working with them, so they get to know adults in the school. Parents are engaged. So those kids, 1, they're having fun learning. 2, they're getting to know staff. 3, they're learning the routines of that school. So they come into school even a little bit ahead of their peers, knowing that at the school I visited, this means everybody quiet, pay attention, listen to what's going on. Okay, now we can go back to what we're working on. And research has shown that has an ongoing impact, positive impact for those kids. So it's looking at those kind of things that don't cost very much at all, but have a payoff. I also sat down with Saturday Academy has a 5-week program that they do with University of Portland, targeted for kids from low-income families. It's a STEAM program, so there's 1 week on the S, there's next week on the T, so science, technology, engineering. for, I think it's $25, and kids get fed as well. And it's very limited number of kids right now, but wow, that's something. Can we get an expansion going there? So there's things like that where we can partner with the community, really focusing on the kids that need it the most. So I think those are the kinds of things that would come out of a strategic plan. How do we put more resources there? Because we know working early is a lot better than putting more money and working later.
In Section B of
By the way, great questions.
Oh, thank you. In Section B of the Portland Public Schools Racial Education Policy, it states the district will create multiple pathways to success in order to meet the needs of our diverse students. What pathways are you considering?
We already have a lot of multiple pathways, actually. So we've got a pretty extensive range of alternative education programs that exist. They kind of run the gamut. Most of them are pretty small, and they are. A number of them are targeted to address specific barriers or challenges that students are having. So we partner with a pretty wide range of community-based organizations to provide educational environments that, if a student has some medical issues that they need to deal with, we partner with organizations that can provide that and still make sure that there's educational content going on. So we've got, I don't know what the exact number is. I want to say 17-ish different programs that fall under the category of multiple pathways. And some of them use community-based organizations. Most of them, some of them are collaborative with where other school districts and the county also collaborate. We have MLC, which is an alternative ed program in Northwest. That's K-12. But we have the two Alliance programs. We have DART programs, which stands for Drug and Alcohol Treatment Programs that also include, a full education component. So we have quite a few. I'm not sure what other ones are being considered. Does anybody else have any more info?
Fundamentally, I think an answer to your question is that we have to recognize, we have to have a system that recognizes and embraces the fact that not everybody learns the same material, not everybody accesses opportunity in the same way. And the best acknowledgement of that has for 100 years been Benson Tech, and that opens up opportunities for college at an enormous rate. The last 2 years, the achievement gap between black and white students at Benson has been 0. They've been even. And most years, historically, Benson Tech's rate of sending kids on to college has been second only to Lincoln's. That kind of hands-on learning opportunity, whether it be for construction or for medicine, that's a wonderful way to meet kids where they're at and give kids opportunities for all kinds of success in life that they can access.
So building somewhat on what both of you said, 2010, I think, or was it a little later, Rita and I were on a committee that recommended to the district that they do a full review of what are called focus option programs, because these are programs, for example, like Da Vinci, like Odyssey, as well as alternative programs like MLC and Alliance. Thanks. To look at what's the role of these programs in the district, because most of them started up fairly spontaneously and were located in the district, just kind of where there happened to be room, without a conscious plan. The district started a review of that about a year ago, and it's gone nowhere, basically. And that's a big issue around our enrollment balancing, but it's also a big issue philosophically in terms of meeting students' needs. If we were, I think, more thoughtful about programs like that, we might have amongst our regular-sized neighborhood schools some smaller learning environments, because not all kids are really well suited for a 500-plus student neighborhood school, but will succeed in a smaller environment. So I think going forward, we can think about that. It's almost like saying, well, are some of our charter schools successful for some reasons? Let's learn from that. Which is, I think, kind of initially the ideal behind charter schools, was try something new. Well, let's learn from that and incorporate that in what we do in the regular public school system. Secondly, one of the big successes for PPS over the last 3 years has been expanding career technical education opportunities outside of Benson. Again, that's a huge thing for all kids, whether they're going to a 4-year university, an apprenticeship program, a community college, whatever. It's great. It helps kids learn, engages different types of learning skills, not just the academic kids, but the hands-on kids as well. It's a great opportunity going forward, and we've done a good job at expanding those. There's more that needs to be done there, but I'm really happy that that's happened.
All right.
Just a couple of things quickly. Yes, Scott's right. 3 years ago, Portland Public Schools had only 9 career and technical ed programs. 7 of those were at Benson Tech. Today, they've got 53. We've grown that and grown those opportunities enormously. And I am very confident that that is one of the things behind our increasing graduation rate. Something else that I think the circumstances of life in Portland are finally forcing us to address is what Scott alluded to, access to these isolated programs. Because, as you may have noticed, traffic in Portland is becoming more and more congested. And it's starting to become really clear, especially as we try and make our yellow bus service work, that no, we aren't a small town anymore. We are a big city with a small city grid and a small city transportation system. And that means that getting across town is becoming more and more the privilege of the privileged. Mm-hmm. And access to a program that a child requires can't be allowed on that basis. We have got to become much more conscious about where we are citing everything and not citing on the basis of opportunity.
So I just wanted to ask, the kids that are falling behind, are they being placed in classrooms with other kids that are falling behind or kids that are achieving?
Yes, what Rita just said, not into the microphone. It depends. That's an awfully good question to ask. In some cases, some schools have some teachers or some programs that are very effective at raising the achievement of a class or a group of students who are behind. In others, I think the thinking, the hope, in many cases, it's hope backed up with pretty good data, demonstrates that students who are behind are helped by being in a classroom with students who are achieving. In both cases, that has to be done very consciously and very deliberately. And that's an area where I know we are working.
Yeah, so there have been programs like the Scholars Program at Franklin that have been very good about engaging students who traditionally weren't headed to college and really engaging them academically. I'm going to date myself here because for when my kids were at Grant, and this is 10, 15 years ago, there was a pretty fair degree of segregation around, quote, college track kids who got into the AP courses, the PSU credit courses. So you were in AP history or you were in, quote, regular U.S. history. And there was, in many of those regular U.S. history courses, there was much lower expectations. And I'm not saying that's happening today. So to be clear on that, but we certainly have a history on that, and that's something we really have to pay attention to.
And for each response, let's try to relate it back to the racial equity policy, because that's the focus. So I know it's been mentioned that your scope of equity is broader. But however, this particular discussion, we're talking about the racial equity policy. So whatever response you guys have, let's try to draw it back to that. Do you guys want to move on to that next question?
So very specifically then, one of the markers we would look at is which students are in those, for example, the college band courses, the AP, the college credit.
Do we have that data now? Or is that something that we can maybe possibly put in place?
That's not data that we have in front of us at this moment, but that's data that does exist. The district in this last year has become much more conscious about tracking the demographics of students who are in AP, in IB, in college credit courses, and very consciously looking at recruiting students of color into those programs. We've got very solid data from surrounding school districts that have been trying this for longer than Portland Public has. And they're getting very, very solid results. Again, Portland Public is pursuing that aggressively at the high school level.
That's awesome. For the next discussion,
Yeah.
let's definitely display that.
And
data.
I'd extend that to career and technical education courses as well.
All right. So our next question is, can it and should the implementation of the racial equity policy plan be part of the superintendent evaluation? And then the second part to this question is, how long is the superintendent contract for, and how often are the evaluations, and will there be reports to the public?
So 1, 2, 3, yes. I believe the contract's for 3 years.
Yes, 3 years with an option for renewal that's written into the contract, something that was a very high priority for all of the members of the school board in recruiting a new superintendent was finding someone who would come and stay. We are not interested in a one-day wonder. We were very clear on that. And it was very good to hear Guadalupe saying yesterday to a second grade student at Saban, "Oh, and I intend to be here when you graduate from high school." So we are looking at building for the long term.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of what the superintendent would be evaluated on, that's going to be related to the strategic plan. So coming out of the strategic plan will be things like, this is what we expect to see a year from now. And I think there's consensus on the board that the evaluations of the superintendent need to be much more comprehensive, much more deliberate, and much clearer in terms of the actual, the things what the expectations are. So I think we're going to see, we are by statute required to evaluate the superintendent once a year. And I think this board is going to be taking this evaluation very seriously.
Along with that responsibility to evaluate is also the responsibility to coach, mentor, support. And that's really incumbent on all of us. And to think about, I'm thinking about my days as a school activist of how I tried to relate to Portland Public. And it's that constructive criticism that we need. That's the train we need to be on, all of us broadly. I'm thinking about how do we help our superintendent succeed, and especially somebody coming in from out of town who clearly has a lot of talent and a lot of the skills we're looking for.
So is that evaluation that you guys are speaking to, is it already developed, or are you saying that it's going to be developed through the strategic plan?
I think it's going to be developed in collaboration with the new superintendent. Okay. And it's, I don't know how long it's going to take for us to come up with something that we could legitimately call a strategic plan, but I think he's going to be on the ground on October 1st, God willing, and I think I think we're going to be able to come up pretty quickly with a short list of priorities, and kind of expectations, pretty clear expectations of what we want to see by April. And it's a very short time to evaluate somebody. It's not even a full year.
So it's a possibility that this racial equity policy could be part of that strategic plan.
Oh, I think will absolutely be part of the evaluation.
Awesome.
Yeah, no question of that.
Okay.
The only question is, like, what pieces can we specify?
Focus on.
Yeah.
And we might, for this first year, be, I think, much more on a general level, and in subsequent years get much more detailed as we figure this out together.
And I know you guys have mentioned we can't go into depth in terms of the Harriet Tubman implementation plan, but just in terms of conversations you guys already had and what you guys can legally say, what has currently been done or what's about to be done with the Harriet Tubman implementation plan, and then if you could tie that into how that relates to an aspect, a piece of that racial equity policy piece. And then from there, we're running out of time, and then we're going to probably wrap up with a closeout from each and every one of us. And then if we have time, is there any questions? You guys have any questions in the audience? Okay, I'm going to get their questions.
I'm sorry we're out of time. No. I'm teasing. So while I want to just start going back to middle schools, while it doesn't come from there was no racial equity plan around that, but the policy and the values Certainly. All three of us have been engaged in the inequities of the K-8s and addressing that. So the creating a middle school again at Harriet Tubman, and boy, the history, being very aware of the history of that, and that's something we need to help our new superintendent come up to speed on. The creation of that comes out of the values of racial equity and addressing the inequities in the middle grades that have been at many of our K-8s. So just that right there comes out of those values.
We don't. There are a number of things we don't yet know about the middle school implementation, and then there are other things that, because we're on a committee, we can't talk about. What I can say is that certainly the three of us are very committed to making sure that these middle schools happen and that they happen well. And I can't speak on behalf of the full board, but I would be surprised if my colleagues on the board didn't feel likewise. So we're going to be paying very close attention, and I think things are happening, and you know, we're going to be paying attention. We expect the community to be paying attention, but this is all kind of grounded in the idea that every middle grade student has a right to expect a full middle grade experience, and that hasn't been happening.
You guys want to do action?
And what I'd also mention just briefly is that we are going to see, as a board, the preliminary plan Tuesday. And that is, I believe, already up on the district website. It should be posted to the district website for Harriet Tubman and for Roseway Heights. Yes?
Okay, just to clarify expectations, it's kind of a plan for a plan.
Exactly. Yeah, I was getting there. And it does not, for instance, mention feeder schools. But it does make it very clear that the board is going to have to make a decision there very soon. So I want you to know things are coming, and things are going to be coming very fast.
All right, great. Quick, we're going to do this question really fast, and then we're going to do our closeout. I'm trying to get here. Come on, you can come up here. And it's about Harriet Tubman.
Well, it's actually more about race equity policy in general, if is that okay? So I'm listening to you speak, and I hear some things that are making me feel very positive about the direction that we're going in. Rita, you mentioned a more bottom-down approach, and so from that aspect, I am thinking just in terms of the climate of classrooms. You also mentioned climate of classrooms. And that does start from the minute kids walk into the school. And I have personally seen that we have very talented teachers that have their pulse on this, and they understand what it means. I mean, I've seen in my own kids' school a very real way, a contrast in the way that these climates are created. And so, one, I would like to know how you are actually using your greatest resource, which are teachers who I don't feel like we're actually holding to the highest esteem right now in the district. We're pretty critical about teachers, but I really think they're doing the best that they can. So I want to know how you will use your greatest resource, these teachers who have their pulse on what these policies changes should look like, and how you are going to use those resources to further inform your work from this point on. I hope that was not too broad.
Thank you.
So I think and this is part of the discussion we have with our incoming superintendent, is how do we get more resources to teachers in terms of coaches, mentors, especially around how do we have equitable practices in the classroom. And that's both curriculum and both relationship building, specific programs like restorative justice, all those kind of things. And have more time for teachers to observe others and to work collaboratively in professional learning communities is really key to moving things forward. And again, that's like the bread and butter of what Guadalupe was doing with the 17 schools he was working with in San Francisco. So that's the piece. It's we love and respect our teachers. How do we help them get even better and to create and enhance the classrooms that are welcoming and supportive of all kids? Does that get?
And I would like to add, maybe to build on what you just said, to be more deliberate and strategic and intentional in really partnering with the teacher union. They have several committees within the union that deals with certain topics, but I think that needs to be more transparent, even on the board side and the union side, and to make that relationship a little bit more transparent. So I want to encourage our union as well as other board members to have a more strategic, transparent partnership, even in the midst of this bargaining that's currently in place. But I just wanted to put that out there. So just to build on what you said, I think it's important to really be intentional in building that relationship with our union.
And then bringing it back to racial equity policy and putting that into action, I'm thinking about middle schools in particular right now, or middle grades, is to have that curriculum that highlights equity issues in all sorts of subjects, and so that we can have robust discussions in the classroom and engage students in leadership activities around equity, and classroom debates, looking at the issues, doing research around equity issues as part of learning history, or whatever the topic is, art and culture. That's part of putting our equity policy into practice.
As we're wrapping up, I just want to mention this, and this is kind of like an action-oriented type of statement and question. I alluded to in the very beginning that it's a lot of things happening politically in our city on multiple levels, in terms of policy, not just in education, but through other arenas in politics. For example, there's several initiatives on the whole idea of the right to return. As you know, as everybody knows, maybe some people don't know, we have a problem of gentrification of people being displaced and moved in other areas. However, there's initiatives that are trying to bring people back. I can name probably 3 of them. I believe some of our community leaders, such as Ron Hurd and Tony Hobson, brought up the point of an idea of a policy that will protect families not to fake addresses, but can continue to attend Boise Elliott, attend Harriet Tubman, attend these schools that's in that Albina district, which is it used to be the Albina Black Belt of Portland. So there's some emotional, spiritual tie to that area. How can we continue to preserve that culture, preserve that emotional tie, preserve those ties, and protect those families that want to come back all the way from the numbers and attend these schools in the Albina district? What are some things, is that something that we can maybe add on to the racial equity policy, or would that be a totally different policy? If we can kind of talk some action steps and maybe move forward from there.
All right, that's in our committee.
Is that a committee thing?
Right, okay, so I'm going to...
Our committee is going to deals with transfer policy.
Although I'm looking at Rita with this perky little expression, because Rita can speak very well to what has been done in the past.
Yeah.
It's critical here.
So I'm gonna have to be careful with my words here because I don't want to be illegal. I'll do this historically. How's that? I and Scott and a bunch of other people were on a committee called SACIT. That it was the Superintendent's Advisory Committee on Enrollment and Transfer. And we made recommendations to the superintendent, at that point it was Carol Smith, in 2014. And again in 2015. And among the things that the committee talked about was having embedded in the policy some kind of right of return. It ended up not making it into the final board resolution, so it's not currently in the enrollment and transfer policy. But it is certainly something that could be. And if we're talking about students who are currently enrolled in a PPS school, that would be a relatively easy policy change to make. It would mostly be a change of practice. What's more complicated would be having kids who are no longer within the boundaries of PPS. Because that would be an inter-district transfer, and that gets more complicated. It's doable, and I can say that subsequent to the presentation from Ron Herndon and Tony Hobson at the board a couple weeks ago, I and Julia Esparza Brown met with them, and we're talking about things that we could do. And we're going to meet again next Friday, along with staff, who can sort of, help identify what are the specific steps that would be required. I'm not sure I can say
The
much
answer is
more
yes,
than that.
It's possible.
It's
doable.
possible.
Okay.
Yeah. What it would look like,
That's still, we can
Yeah.
still discuss that.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Is there any other questions from the audience as we close out?
Okay. So I've been hearing a lot that we don't have, or you guys don't have plans for some of the stuff that we've been talking about. So what if we could get the information out to the community so that they could come up with plans, so that when the plans are put in place, they feel like those are plans that'll work? Is that something we could do, or something that's already being done?
Let me say yes, that's very definitely an option going forward. In 2000, the district actually did a strategic planning process. It engaged hundreds of Portlanders, including students and parents and teachers and principals and everybody. We had an overarching committee, and then 7 action teams that came up with some very specific plans on different topics. It was great. I learned a tremendous amount through that process, and the plan died a very early death. It was really much more embraced by the community than by district leadership. But it is very possible to structure a strategic planning process that does have that kind of community engagement. The challenge is to make sure that it's that balance of having leadership buy-in with the community, so that the implementation, boom, we're ready to go. So that's the tricky part, because if you're just the community doing it and you don't have the buy-in of leadership, well, guess what? But yeah, that's a exciting way to do things, an engaging way to do things, and to have that kind of community ownership is pretty cool. So,
All right, anybody else want to speak to that?
and in fact, I can't see us doing a strategic plan without that kind of engagement.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, actually. I think the tricky thing is going to be we don't want it to become a process palooza. We don't want this to drag on forever because we've been doing public processes, a lot of them, over the last 10 years. So one thing that we can do, I think, to streamline some of it would be to go back to the stuff that's come out of all of the other processes. You know, we've had stuff we've been doing this a long time. A lot of opportunities for people to tell us what they want and what they think. And I think we can, what I'm hoping, at least, is that we do have some kind of public process that will engage the community with this new superintendent so that we can kind of all move forward together and we all know what we're talking about. But that we can kind of streamline it by checking back with everybody based on what we've already heard for the last 10 years, and have it be a more targeted conversation so that we can walk out of rooms with actual thoughts, you know, like we're going to do X about something. Because I think that's what's been missing. We've had a lot of community engagement at various times, but it hasn't really translated into action. And I'm guessing I'm not the only one who's a little impatient about it.
And from this conversation, what would you recommend as action steps that we can take forward? And I just want to reiterate as we close, and I know we're running out of time. Again, this right here, this is culturally relevant pedagogy. It's engaging students. It's empowering students about and getting them involved in the political aspect of how to impact our community. Basically, just through engagement and empowerment. So with that, what are some things that we can do in terms of action steps? Because we even have culturally relevant instruction written inside of the policy of our racial policy, equity policy, and even has that every student with equitable access to high quality culturally relevant instruction, curriculum, support, facilities, and other educational resources. So what are some ways that we can actually measure that, measure culturally relevant instruction, and actually measure if culturally relevant curriculum is even in place? So I want us to think about that as we move forward in this conversation. And I think we as a community have to be conscious of the fact that this school year, I think we need to look at this school year as more of a planning school year, even though we're going to be in the thick and in the trenches and still doing our work. But we have to keep these conversations going, and we plan to do this bi-monthly to keep this conversation going. But we have to look at everything, the whole transition. Transition does not happen overnight. We are in transition with our new superintendent, new board members. So we just have to be patient and just go through the process. But just be conscious that this school year, look at it as a planning year, and then we can just go full throttle for that 2018, 2019 school year, and this from here on out, just see results and great results. I'm very optimistic that we will. I'm very confident that we will. We have community members that are passionate about this work, and we clearly have board members who's volunteering their time on a Saturday to come and talk about and discuss with us. And we have young people that we're going to continue to get engaged and get involved. We want to thank the NAACP for supporting us, Urban League, Coalition of Black Men, other organizations out there that are supporting us in our work. So continue to engage. I'm just going to have you guys just close out maybe what's on your heart, some action steps, and then hopefully we can continue this conversation with some different board members. Again, we don't want to have more than 3 board members, because if it's 4, it would be considered a quorum and it would be considered a community meeting, and we won't be able to control the meeting in a sense, right? The board will control the meeting. So again, we appreciate you guys taking the time out. If you guys can close out, and then we're gonna have our 2 moderators close out and go from there.
Well, what I want to say in response to that, Karanja, is well, I certainly respect that. What I keep telling people is that we are flying the airplane. We are trying to build the airplane, and the airplane is on fire. And like Guadalupe has demonstrated in his career up to this point, we can't be satisfied with incremental progress. And we need to be making change. We need to be making very positive change right now and through this year and more going ahead each year subsequent. I have 2 children who are entering their sophomore year of high school, and I expect this to be a radically different district by the time they graduate. And I'm really looking forward to that. And one place where I am very heartened is that I believe now we have a board and we are going to have a superintendent who know perfectly well, to your point, that it's only what's measured that's going to be addressed. We are absolutely going to be putting numbers on what we want to see accomplished, and we are going to be holding ourselves, the district, and the superintendent accountable for achieving those. And that's where I think we are moving. Thank you.
We'll hold you to it.
So Paul loves disaster movies. I'm teasing. I want to say the same thing, but in a slightly different way. And it's, glass half empty, half full, is that we have a tremendous number of staff and schools who are deeply engaged in making good things happen and trying to drive the kind of changes that we want. Just in our schools, well, they're not happening today, but good thing when school is in, good things happening every day in our schools. So that's a little bit of a paradox, but I think both things happening. And I just want to say thank you.
Okay, so I think this is it's going to be an interesting year. It's going to be a challenging year in a lot of ways, because I think I think you're right. We are going to have to be patient. We didn't get where we are today overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight either. But I think we need to temper the patience with a little impatience. Kids entering 3rd grade in 2 weeks, they're not going to get another chance at 3rd grade. So we need to make it count. And I would say one of the things that I have seen over the last 2 months since becoming a board member that has really given me hope has been the discussions that are going on around allocating resources to schools. And we're looking at a new model for allocating resources. And it's going to be complicated. I don't think we're going to be able probably to do everything that we need to do this coming year to kind of address the inequities in resources given to certain schools. But I think we're going to be able to make some progress. And I think it's going to be, I'm hopeful that we're going to enter kind of a new era about how to think about allocating resources to schools to ensure that kids have equitable access to what they need. So I see that as a huge shift in the way we're even thinking about resourcing schools. And it's not going to be perfect, and there are going to be glitches and all the rest of it, but we have movement. And I think with the new superintendent coming in, he's got, not only is he an educational leader, he is also, by all accounts, the kind of guy who has the ideas, but then can actually make them happen. And that's an unusual set of skills. You know, being a teacher at heart and a systems thinker and a guy who can, you know, and a visionary and a guy who can actually get stuff done. And that's what we need. And we're going to have to support him because it's going to take some work. But for the first time in a very long time, I really feel like we can do this.
And as a last thing, Karanja, I want to pull it back to something you've alluded to several times, the political climate in which we live. And we have to recognize that at a national level, public education in this country is under direct attack. And again, one of the things about which I feel very positive and very confident is that this board, this superintendent, and this community are going to be united in a full-throated, full-throttled defense of a free, equitable, and accessible public education, because we know it's the foundation of our democracy. And I think we are going to be uniquely positioned in this country in that way.
All right, we shall find out.
You know, I'm hopeful that with the new with the new board and the new superintendent, we're only in our second month, and I've seen a lot of work that the board has done. They've accomplished in finding instructional leader for our district within 2 months that they've been on the board, or we've been on the board. You know, and with filling the vacancies in central office, that like you said, Rita, with the new era, I really feel like with the leadership that we have now, that there is a will that we want to move in a positive direction for this district. And I think that you guys have instilled that hope in that. But said that a lot of good work has been done. A lot of good work still needs to be done. Yeah.
You want to close out? Say something.
Well, I'm not really sure what to say. I mean, I feel like I've learned a lot from coming to these meetings, and that means that the people viewing are learning a lot. And I think it's good that we're here asking questions, and you know, you guys are providing the answers. Yeah.
All right. Again, you guys in Cyberland here, you know, give the youth a hand, you know, because it takes a lot of courage for them to do that, and they did an excellent job. Again, I heard the district say that this is going to be shifting into a student-focused district. I want to have another policy recommendation. In order to make a student-centered focused district, I think a student representative should have voting access and power. So I don't know if there's any type of policy change that we can make that will allow our student representatives to actually have a vote in policy change. I want to push that.
State law.
Yeah.
It's state law?
It's state law.
Okay, so maybe that's something in Salem that we need to advocate for and deal with. So those of you who are down in Salem, be looking out for that. So thank you guys, and have a good day.